I thought tonight was just a lavish party, until my father toasted my brother as his only proud achievement. Then the bride stared at me, like she recognized the person who saved her life. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed asking if I knew about a huge loan in my name. I smiled, because I finally understood that I was not invisible. I was just being erased. My name is Isla Carter, for 33 years. I have existed in the periphery of my own family, a ghost that they forgot to exorcise. In the Carter household, there was always a hierarchy, invisible to the neighbors, but as solid as concrete to us. My brother, Evan, was the protagonist, the golden sun around which our domestic solar system revolved. I was the extra, the background character who was just supposed to hit her marks, stay out of focus, and not cost the production too much money. I was Plan B. I was the insurance policy just in case the golden boy did not work out. But even then, the expectations for me were so low they were practically subterranean. I learned my place in the ledger of my father's heart very early on. It is a strange thing to realize that love, for some parents, is a finite resource, something to be budgeted and allocated based on potential returns on investment. I remember the specific afternoon when the ink dried on my understanding of this family business. I was 18. My father sat at the mahogany dining table, the one we were only allowed to use on Thanksgiving, and signed a check for Evan's tuition. It was not just a check. It was a statement of faith. It was $190,000 over 4 years. $190,000. When I asked about my college plans, about the acceptance letter I was holding in my shaking hands, he did not even look up from his checkbook. He just gave a dismissive wave, like he was shooing away a fly, and delivered the line that has echoed in my head for over a decade. He said, "You do not need degrees. Just find a husband." That was it. That was the summary of my worth. I was not an investment. I was a liability waiting to be transferred to another man's balance sheet. Fast forward to tonight. We are at the Cedar Hollow Country Club, a place that smells of old money, lemon polish, and aggressive desperation. The chandeliers are so bright, they make my eyes ache. There are 180 guests here, a curated list of my father's business partners, golf buddies, and people he wants to impress. They are all here to celebrate Evan's engagement to Sloane Keller. And I am here too, standing near a potted fern, wearing a dress I bought with my own money, sipping a drink I paid for at the bar, because the open tab apparently did not extend to the estrangement table. The noise level in the room drops as a spoon chimes against a crystal glass. My father, Graham Carter, stands up near the head table. He looks impeccable in his tuxedo, the very image of a patriarch who has conquered the world. He raises his champagne flute, and the room leans in. He loves an audience. He loves the performance of fatherhood, much more than the actual labor of it. He clears his throat and smiles that winning smile, the one that sells real estate and hides cracks in foundations. He looks at Evan, who is beaming, looking every bit the part of the successful heir. My father's voice booms across the room. He says, "I look at Evan, and I see my legacy. It is a hard world out there, but Evan has conquered it. He is the only successful child a father could ask for, the one who makes all the sacrifice worth it." The room erupts in polite applause. I stand there, frozen. I am not surprised. Really, I should not be, but hearing it out loud, in front of nearly 200 people, hits different. It is not a stab. It is a suffocation. The only successful child. I am standing 20 feet away from him. I am breathing. I am alive. But in his narrative, I do not exist. I am a rounding error. I look around the room, scanning the faces of aunts, uncles, cousins, people who know I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school, people who know I passed the bar exam on my first try. Surely, someone will look at me with sympathy. Surely someone will feel the awkward weight of that erasure. But no one meets my eye. They are all clapping. They are all smiling at Evan. They are all complicit in the lie, because it is easier to clap than to question the man paying for the open bar. I take a sip of my drink, trying to swallow the lump of dry ice in my throat. I tell myself it does not matter. I tell myself I am a grown woman, a 33-year-old attorney, and I do not need Daddy's approval to validate my existence. But the inner child is a stubborn thing. She is still standing in that dining room, holding an acceptance letter, waiting to be seen. Then, something shifts. I look toward the head table. Sloane, the bride-to-be, is not looking at Evan. She is not looking at my father. She is looking at me. Sloane comes from a family that makes the Carters look like we are shopping at a discount store. She is polished, sharp, and usually carries herself with a practiced indifference. But right now, her gaze is intense. She is staring at the lapel of my blazer. I instinctively touch it. It is a small, discreet pin, silver, geometric, understated. It is not jewelry. It is a professional insignia, the kind you only recognize if you are in the industry, or if you have been on the receiving end of what I do. It is the mark of a specialist in high-stakes fraud litigation. Sloane's eyes travel from the pin to my face. Her expression changes. It is not the polite, vacant smile of a bride greeting her future sister-in-law. It is a look of dawning recognition. It is the look of someone putting together a puzzle they did not know they were playing. She tilts her head slightly, her lips parting as if she wants to say something, but the applause swells again, drowning out the moment. My stomach turns. I do not want to be recognized. Not here. Not tonight. My survival strategy for the last 15 years has been simple. Fly under the radars. Do not make waves. Do not give them ammunition. If I am invisible, they cannot hurt me. If I am invisible, they cannot critique my career, my clothes, my life. I have perfected the art of the Irish exit, and tonight feels like the perfect time to deploy it. I set my half-empty glass on a passing tray. I need to get out of here. I need to get to my car, drive back to the city, and wash the stench of Cedar Hollow off my skin. I turn toward the double doors, keeping my head down, weaving through the crowd of tuxedos and sequins. Just walk, Isla. Just keep walking. You do not need to say goodbye. They will not notice you are gone because they barely noticed you were here. I am almost at the door. I can feel the cool air of the lobby reaching for me. I am free. Then, my clutch vibrates. It is a short, aggressive buzz against my palm. I ignore it. I take another step. It buzzes again, and again. It is insistent. I stop in the shadow of a large, decorative pillar, shielded from the ballroom. I pull out my phone. The screen is bright in the dim light. It is a text from a colleague at my firm. We are not close friends, but we share a database access that tracks financial liabilities for background checks. The message is short, but the words are heavy enough to sink a ship. Isla, are you sitting down? I was running the standard conflict check for the new case, and your name flagged in the national credit system. Did you know there is a student loan consolidation of $80,000 under your Social Security number? It is listed as Parent Plus, but the liability was transferred to you entirely 7 years ago. I stare at the screen. The numbers dance before my eyes. $80,000. My breath catches in my throat. I lean back against the cold plaster of the pillar. A loan? I never took out a loan. I worked double shifts at a diner. I worked in the library basement. I ate instant noodles for 4 years, so I would not have debt. I paid for every single credit hour with my own sweat. I read the text again. Transferred to you. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the violence of a car crash. The tuition. The $190,000 my father paid for Evan. He always said he paid for it. He bragged about it. But 80,000 of that. I look back into the ballroom. My father is shaking hands, laughing, looking like the king of the world. My brother is raising a glass, looking like the prince who inherited the kingdom. And me? I am the peasant they taxed to pay for the castle. If this story has ever happened to you, if you have ever been the child who was asked to be smaller so someone else could be bigger, if you have ever been the retirement plan for parents who never invested in you, go to the comments right now and write, I get it, because I know I am not the only one. I look down at my phone again. The screen blurs. I thought tonight was just about favoritism. I thought it was just about emotional neglect. That I could handle. I have handled that for 33 years. I thought my father just preferred Evan. I thought he just loved him more. I stand up straight, and for the first time in my life, the invisibility cloak falls off. I am not invisible. I am a resource. I am a line of credit. I smile, but there is no humor in it. It is a cold, sharp thing. I thought he was just biased. I didn't know he used my name. To understand how a father could steal from his own daughter, you first have to understand the ecosystem that created Graham Carter. We lived in Maple Glen, Virginia, a subdivision that looked less like a neighborhood and more like a catalog for a life that did not actually exist. It was a place where the grass was not just green, it was color-corrected. The driveways were pressure-washed into submission every spring, and the mailboxes were all painted the same shade of slate gray, mandated by a homeowners association that had more power than the local government. Our house was the crown jewel of the cul-de-sac. It was a 4-bedroom colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch that we never sat on, because sitting was not a productive activity. From the outside, we were the poster family for upper-middle-class stability. Inside, we were a corporation, and I was the intern who they could not legally fire but refused to promote. My father, Graham, did not have friends. He had contacts. He did not have hobbies. He had networking opportunities. He was a man who collected achievements the way other men collected baseball cards. But since he could not play every position on the field himself, he needed proxies. He needed extensions of his ego to go out into the world and bring back trophies that he could display on the mantle. That was where my brother, Evan, came in. Evan was 2 years older than me, and from the moment he could hold a ball, he was designated as the legacy. In the Carter household, being male meant you were an asset. You were equity. You were something that would grow in value and eventually carry the name forward. Being female, in my father's antiquated accounting system, meant you were a temporary liability. You were a holding pattern, a responsibility to be maintained at the lowest possible cost until you could be transferred to another man's ledger via marriage. This was not something he whispered in secret. It was the ambient noise of our lives. It was in the way the budget was handled. If Evan got a C- in math, it was a crisis. It was a sign that the system was failing him, and money would be poured into the problem immediately. Private tutors, after-school learning centers, consultations with specialists to see if he just needed a different testing environment. Every failure of Evan's was treated as a temporary glitch in a high-performing software. If I brought home a report card with straight A's, the reaction was a distracted nod. My success was not celebrated because it was not relevant. It was treated like a garnish on a plate. Nice to look at, but not the main course. I remember one specific Tuesday in October when I was 16. It was the night of the state academic decathlon ceremony. I had placed first in the district. It was not a small thing. I had studied for months, waking up at 4 a.m. to memorize Supreme Court case precedents while the rest of the house slept. I had put the invitation on the refrigerator door 3 weeks in advance, held in place by a magnet shaped like a pineapple. When the evening came, I stood in the foyer in my ironed skirt, waiting. The grandfather clock ticked. 6 o'clock, 6:15, 6:30. Finally. The garage door rumbled open. I felt a surge of relief, thinking they were just late, that we would have to rush. But at least they were here. The door opened, and my mother, Elaine, walked in, followed by Evan and my father. They were wearing casual clothes. Evan was muddy. My father was carrying a set of folding chairs. My mother stopped when she saw me, her hand flying to her mouth. The look on her face was not malice. It was something worse. It was total, blank forgetfulness. "Oh, Isla," she said, her voice soft and airy. "Is that tonight?" My father walked past me. heading for the kitchen to get a bottle of water. He did not even break stride. "We had to stay late at the scrimmage," he said. Evan had a breakthrough with his defensive footwork. The coach wanted to talk to us about his potential for the varsity lineup next year. I stood there, clutching my certificate that I had already received because I had to walk across the stage alone, while other kids waved to their cheering sections. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. The stinging pricking of tears I refused to shed. "But the ceremony," I said, my voice sounding very small in the high-ceiling foyer. "I won. Dad. I got first place." He stopped then, turning to look at me with a look of mild irritation, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting dinner. "Isla, don't be dramatic," he said. "Academics come naturally to you. You are lucky that way. Evan has to fight for his ground. We have to invest where the effort is needed. Besides, nobody recruits for college based on a quiz bowl." My mother gave me a sympathetic squeeze on the arm, the kind you give to a stranger in a waiting room. "Let's not ruin the mood," she whispered. "Your father is very happy about the scrimmage. Let's just keep the peace." That was my mother's role. She was the peacekeeper, the buffer zone. She smoothed over the sharp edges of my father's narcissism with casseroles and silence. She saw everything, but she chose to see nothing. To her, a quiet house was a happy house, even if the silence was heavy with resentment. That night, we ate meatloaf. Evan spent 40 minutes talking about a block he made on the field, a move that apparently changed the momentum of a practice game. My father listened with rapt attention, analyzing the play, discussing strategy, treating this teenage athletic moment like a boardroom maneuver. I ate in silence. I watched them. It was around that time that I started to see my family not as people, but as data points. I started to notice the patterns. I noticed that when Evan backed the car into the mailbox, my father laughed and called it a rite of passage, paying for the repairs without a second thought when I accidentally dropped a plate while doing the dishes. I was lectured for 20 minutes about the value of goods and the importance of being careful with other people's property. I noticed that Evan's allowance was double mine, categorized as networking money so he could go to the movies with the right crowd. My money was for essentials, and I was expected to save it. I noticed that my father often used the word investment when talking about Evan. We are investing in his future. We are building his portfolio. When he talked about me, he used words like maintenance or expenses. I began to keep a ledger in my head. I did not have a diary because diaries could be read. I had a mental spreadsheet. I recorded every slight, every double standard, every dollar diverted. I did not know why I was doing it at the time. I thought maybe I was just keeping myself sane, proving to myself that I was not crazy, that the disparity was real. But looking back, I realize I was training. I was learning to be an investigator long before I ever went to law school. I was learning that people tell you exactly who they are in the financial details, in where they put their money and where they withhold it. My father thought he was raising a docile daughter who would fade into the background. He did not realize he was raising a forensic accountant who was memorizing his books. He thought I was just looking down at my plate to avoid eye contact. He did not know I was looking at the cracks in the foundation, waiting for the day the house would fall. And in Maple Glen, where appearance was everything, the only crime worse than being a failure was being caught. My father was very good at not getting caught. He was very good at hiding the rot behind a fresh coat of paint. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that the people who live in the walls see everything. And I had been living in the walls for 17 years. The spring I turned 18 was defined by the smell of paper and the sound of silence. While my friends were planning road trips and picking out prom dresses, I was running calculations on the back of old receipts. I had done the math so many times that the numbers were burned into my retinas. I had been accepted to Wellspring State University. It was not the Ivy League, but it was solid, respectable, and most importantly, affordable. I had secured a merit scholarship that covered 70% of the tuition. The gap, the insurmountable wall between me and a future that did not involve serving tables for the rest of my life, was $14,500 a year. $14,500. In the grand scheme of the Carter family finances, this was a rounding error. It was less than what my father spent on his golf club membership fees and the annual lease on his luxury sedan combined. I was not asking for a free ride. I was asking for the bridge loan to get me to the other side of adulthood. I had practiced my pitch in the bathroom mirror for 3 days. I had a folder prepared with pie charts, showing the return on investment of a law degree versus the initial cost. I was naive enough to think that if I presented it like a business proposal, Graham Carter would respect the hustle. I chose a Tuesday night to bring it up. Tuesdays were usually safe. My father was typically in a good mood because his weekly sales reports came in on Tuesday afternoons. We were sitting at the dinner table, the air thick with the smell of roast chicken and the unspoken tension that always hovered over us, like a low-pressure system. My mother, Elaine, was pushing peas around her plate, performing the role of the attentive listener. Evan was there, looking smug. He had barely scraped through his finals, but you would not know it from his posture. He sat back in his chair, taking up space, radiating the confidence of someone who knows the safety net is made of titanium. Before I could clear my throat to speak, my father reached under the table and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He placed it in front of Evan with a thud that rattled the silverware. "I have some news," my father announced, his voice booming with theatrical pride. He looked at Evan, his eyes crinkling with the kind of warmth I had spent my entire childhood trying to ignite. "We have finalized the arrangements. St. Aldridge College. St. Aldridge." I felt the blood drain from my face. St. Aldridge was not just a school. It was a resort with a library. It was private, prestigious, and obscenely expensive. The tuition alone was north of $45,000 a year, not including room, board, and the inevitable lifestyle costs that came with keeping up with the children of senators and oil tycoons. "You are going to have the best 4 years of your life, son," my father continued, beaming. "I have already spoken to the Alumni Association. They are expecting you. This is the straight line to success. No detours." Evan picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hand like it was a brick of gold. "Thanks, Dad," he said, casually, as if he had just been handed a salt shaker. "I will make the most of it." My mother clapped her hands together softly. "Oh, it is wonderful. Graham, just wonderful." I sat there, my hand clutching my own thin folder under the table. The contrast was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. St. Aldridge cost 3 times what I needed. They were committing nearly $200,000 to Evan's education without blinking, despite his mediocre grades and lack of direction. I knew the window was closing. If I did not speak now, the budget for the year would be mentally allocated, and I would be locked out. "Dad," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. He turned to me, the smile fading slightly, the light in his eyes dimming as it shifted from his son to his daughter. "Yes. Isla?" I pulled my folder out and placed it on the table. It looked pathetic next to Evan's cream-colored packet. I got into Wellspring State. I said, "I have the acceptance letter here, and I got the Dean's Merit Scholarship." I saw a flicker of something in my mother's eyes. Relief. Maybe. Or perhaps just surprise that I had managed it on my own. "That is nice. Isla," she said, though she glanced at my father before finishing the sentence. I kept my eyes on him. "The scholarship covers most of it," I continued, pushing the folder slightly toward him. "I just need help with the remainder. It is $14,500 a year. If you can help me with the tuition, I will work to cover my books and living expenses. I have it all broken down here." I waited. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. I watched my father look at the folder. He did not open it. He did not reach for it. He did not even read the name of the university printed on the cover. He just stared at it for a second, then looked up at me with an expression that was terrifyingly blank. He took a sip of his wine, set the glass down, and delivered the sentence that would sever the last thread of loyalty I held for this family. "Isla," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were explaining why we could not buy a second boat. "You do not need degrees. Just find a husband." The world stopped. I waited for the punchline. I waited for him to laugh. I waited for my mother to gasp, to reach out and say, "Graham, that is not fair. She has worked so hard." But there was nothing. My mother looked down at her roast chicken, suddenly very interested in the texture of the skin. She did not say a word. Her silence was a signature on the contract of my abandonment. She agreed. Or maybe she did not agree, but she was too cowardly to disagree, which was exactly the same thing. I looked at Evan. He was busy opening his envelope, pretending he had not heard a thing. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew he was getting the feast, while I was being denied crumbs. And he did not care. He felt entitled to it. My father was already turning back to Evan. "We need to look into a car for you up there," he said, You cannot be stuck on campus without wheels. I felt something shatter inside my chest. It was not a loud break. It was quiet, like a hairline fracture in a structural beam. It was the realization that I had been playing a game where the rules were rigged against me, from birth. I had thought that if I was smart enough, good enough, frugal enough, I could earn my place. But merit had nothing to do with it. I was a girl. In Graham Carter's world, I was an accessory. My value lay in who I married, not who I became. Spending money on my education was, to him, a bad investment. Why pay for a degree when my destiny was to be someone else's problem? I could have screamed. I could have flipped the table. I could have thrown the pie charts in his face and listed every A I had ever earned. But I looked at their faces, the indifference, the arrogance, the complicity, and I realized it would be a waste of energy. You cannot negotiate with people who do not see you as a person. So I swallowed the scream. I swallowed the tears that were burning the back of my throat. I picked up my folder, sliding it back into my lap. "Okay," I said. The word was barely a whisper, but it was the heaviest word I have ever spoken. It sounded like compliance. To them, it probably sounded like acceptance, but it was not. It was a severance package. It was me signing off on the relationship. They went back to eating. They went back to discussing Evan's future. The dorms, the fraternity options. I finished my dinner. I chewed. I swallowed. I drank my water. I performed the pantomime of a daughter, but the daughter was gone. That night, I did not cry. Crying implies hope. It implies you think your tears might move someone. I knew better now. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room. I navigated to the search bar. I did not search for student loans. I did not search for other scholarships. It was too late for that. I searched for jobs. Overnight shift. No experience needed. Immediate start. Waitress wanted. Tips plus hourly. Warehouse stocking. Heavy lifting required. I filled out applications until my eyes blurred. I uploaded my resume to every staffing agency within a 20-mile radius. I was signing my own contract for survival. I made a vow to myself in the quiet of that room, typing furiously while my brother slept down the hall, dreaming of his fully funded future. I will never ask you for a single penny again. Not for a book. Not for a tire change. Not for a wedding. Not for a funeral. If they wanted me to find a husband to support me, I would disappoint them in the most spectacular way possible. I would support myself. I would build a life so impenetrable that they would never be able to claim credit for it. I looked at the acceptance letter one last time before tucking it into a drawer. I would go to Wellspring. I did not know how yet, but I would go. And I would do it without Graham Carter's name on a single check. I finally understood my role in this house. I was not a child to be nurtured. I was not a legacy to be built. I was just the aesthetic filler. I was the plan B to ensure the family portrait looked balanced. I was the insurance policy against social embarrassment, meant to be parked quietly in a marriage so they could say they raised a normal daughter. But insurance policies have a funny way of expiring if you stop paying the premiums. And as of tonight, my coverage was canceled. My life became a mathematical equation where the variables were time, energy, and money, and the result was always 0. I stopped being Isla Carter, the daughter, and became Isla Carter, the employee. I learned that the American dream is affordable if you have rich parents, but if you do not, you pay for it in sleep deprivation and caffeine addiction. I worked 3 jobs. My day started at 4:30 in the morning at a diner called the Eggy Spoon. It was the kind of place where the menu was sticky, and the regulars tipped in quarters. I smelled like old fryer grease and maple syrup for 4 years. I could carry 4 plates on one arm and pour coffee with the other while memorizing the periodic table in my head. My apron pocket was not for tips. It was for flashcards. Every time the kitchen was backed up, I would pull out a card. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. I learned to study in 30-second bursts. At 2 in the afternoon, I ran to campus for classes. I sat in the back row, not because I was shy, but because I needed to be near the outlet to charge my laptop, which had a battery life of about 11 minutes. I did not take notes. I transcribed. I treated every lecture like a deposition I would need to reference later. At 6 in the evening, I started my second shift at the university library. This was the graveyard shift, the one nobody wanted because it went until 2 in the morning. I sat at the front desk, checking out books for students who were partying or panicking. The silence there was heavy, but it was the only time I could really read. I slept in the stacks sometimes, curling up on the floor in the section on European history, because the carpet there was newer and softer. On weekends, I tutored rich high school kids who had the same look in their eyes that Evan had, the look of people who knew they would pass because their last name was on the building. I charged them $25 an hour, and I hated every minute of it. But $25 bought me groceries for 3 days. Poverty has a specific texture. It feels like the hardened ridge of superglue against your heel. My only pair of professional black flats split at the sole during my sophomore year. I could not afford $40 for a new pair, so I bought a tube of glue for $3.50 every Sunday night. I would glue them back together, clamping them shut with a heavy textbook. By Friday, they would be flapping again. It was a humiliating rhythm, a weekly reminder that I was walking on borrowed time. I ate instant ramen until the sodium made my fingers swell. I drank water to stop the hunger pangs, and the fear was constant. I was terrified of getting sick. A flu meant missing a shift. Missing a shift meant being short on rent. A cavity was a financial catastrophe. I brushed my teeth 4 times a day because I knew I could not afford a dentist. I treated my body like a rental car that I had to return without a scratch because I did not have the insurance. I stopped going home for holidays. The excuse I gave was work, which was true, but it was also a shield. I could not bear to sit at that mahogany table and watch Evan list his achievements. Evan, who was now at St. Alderidge, driving a car my father bought him, joining a fraternity that cost $2,000 a semester, and posting photos of ski trips on social media. My mother would call me sometimes, her voice thin and guilty. "We missed you at Thanksgiving," she would say. "Evan told us all about his internship. That is great." "Mom," I would say, staring at the wall of my studio apartment, which was actually just a converted garage that smelled like mildew. I am really happy for him. I mastered the art of lying by omission. I never told them about the glue in my shoes. I never told them I was on the dean's list every single semester. I hoarded my victories because I knew if I shared them, they would be diminished. They would be compared to Evan and found wanting. 4 years of this grind. 4 years of sleeping 4 hours a night. And then I graduated. I graduated summa cum laude from Wellspring State. It was the highest honor. I was in the top 1% of my class. I had earned it with every drop of coffee and every blister on my feet. I sent an invitation to the house in Maple Glen. I mailed it 2 months in advance. I did not ask for a party. I did not ask for a gift. I just wanted them to see me walk. I wanted my father to sit in a folding chair and watch me cross a stage that he did not pay for. 3 weeks before graduation, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Hi, honey. We received the invite. So proud of you. Unfortunately, Evan has a very important networking gala for his fraternity alumni that weekend, and your father thinks it is crucial for his future career connections. We have to be there to support him. We will send you a card. Love, Mom." I stared at the phone. I did not throw it. I did not scream. I just felt a cold, hard stone settle in my stomach. Evan's party was more important than my graduation. Evan's potential connections were more valuable than my actual achievement. I went to the ceremony alone. I sat in a sea of black gowns, watching other students wave to their families in the bleachers. I saw fathers holding bouquets of roses. I saw mothers wiping tears. When they called my name, Isla Carter, summa cum laude, I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and smiled for the official camera. There was no one to wave to. After the ceremony, I was standing outside the auditorium, holding my diploma case, feeling like an idiot for lingering. The campus was emptying out. Nice sash. Kid. I turned around. It was the security guard. A man named Mr. Henderson. I knew him because he worked the night shift at the library. He had seen me sleeping in the history section more times than I could count. He was an older man with tired eyes, and a thermos that always smelled of chicory. "Thanks, Mr. Henderson," I said. He nodded at the diploma. "You worked hard for that. I saw you. You were the last one out of the building every night. You did good." He reached out and shook my hand. His grip was rough and warm. "Congratulations." "Isla," he said. I almost broke down right there. A stranger. A man who was paid minimum wage to watch the doors, had seen me more clearly than the man who gave me his DNA, That handshake meant more to me than 1,000 checks from Graham Carter ever could. That was the moment I decided I was not done. I looked at the diploma. It was a piece of paper. Just a piece of paper. But in America, paper is power. Paper is the difference between sleeping in a garage and owning the house. Paper is the weapon used to keep people like me out, and it is the only weapon that can let us in. I applied to law school that night, not the prestigious ones Evan would have gone to. I applied to Stonemere School of Law. It was a night school program, designed for working adults. It was gritty, unpretentious, and practical. I did not want to be a corporate lawyer. I did not want to help rich men merge their companies. I chose a different track. I specialized in civil litigation and fraud investigation. I wanted to learn how to read the fine print. I wanted to understand how people hide things. I wanted to know how money moves, how signatures are forged, how liabilities are shifted. I wanted to understand the mechanics of the lie. I told myself I was doing it for a career. I told myself it was because I was good at details. But deep down, I think I was arming myself. I was building an arsenal because I knew, instinctively, that the world was full of Grahams and Evans, and the only way to beat them was to know the rules better than they did. I spent the next 3 years working during the day and studying law at night. I became obsessed with documentation. I learned that the truth is rarely in what people say. It is always in what they sign. I learned that every thief leaves a paper trail if you look hard enough. I thought I was studying to catch strangers. I thought I was preparing to fight nameless corporations and faceless scammers. I did not know that while I was sitting in Contracts Law 101, learning about liability and consent, my own name was being signed on documents I had never seen. I did not know that the very people who told me I did not need a degree were using my credit history to finance the lifestyle they claimed I was not part of. I was busy learning how to catch a fraud, completely unaware that the fraud was already sleeping in my childhood bedroom. By 33. I had curated a life that looked nothing like the one Graham Carter had predicted for me. I was an associate attorney at Northgate and Vale Legal, a boutique firm in the city known for being the shark you hire when you smell blood in the water. We did not do billboards. We did not do television commercials with catchy jingles. We did corporate litigation and financial fraud investigation. My specialty was forensic contract analysis. Colleagues joked that I could smell a lie in a PDF document from across the room. It was not a superpower. It was a survival mechanism I had honed at the dinner table in Maple Glen. When you grow up watching people curate a reality that contradicts the facts, you learn to look for the discrepancies. I learned that the truth is rarely in the bold headings. It is in the footnotes, the addendums, the clauses buried in size 8 font at the bottom of page 42. I spent my days tearing apart the carefully constructed narratives of CEOs who thought they could hide embezzlement behind jargon. There was a grim satisfaction in it. Every time I exposed a fraudulent asset or a hidden liability, I felt like I was retroactively winning an argument with my father. My success was quiet. It had to be. In a world where everyone screams for attention, silence is the ultimate flex. I bought an apartment in the city. It was not a sprawling colonial with a manicured lawn. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a restored industrial building, with exposed brick and floors that did not squeak. But the most beautiful thing about it was the mortgage. Every month, the money that left my account was money I had earned. There was no co-signer, no guarantor, no parental safety net. If the roof leaked, I fixed it. If the market crashed, I dealt with it. I had built a network of peers, judges, other attorneys, forensic accountants who respected me for my brain, not my lineage. I had friends who knew me as Isla the Shark, not Isla the Shadow. My family knew almost nothing of this. We had settled into a relationship defined by distance and omission. I visited maybe twice a year, usually for a few hours around Christmas, armed with a polite smile and a non-negotiable departure time. My mother knew I worked at a law firm, but in her mind, I think she filed it under administrative support. When she asked about work, she asked if my boss was nice, or if the hours were long. Never about the cases I won. I never corrected her. I learned that sharing my success with them was like pouring water into a sieve. It just disappeared without making an impact. My father never asked. To him, my career was a hobby, something I was doing to pass the time until I fulfilled my biological destiny of finding a husband. He still introduced me to his friends simply as Isla, while Evan was introduced with a resume attached. This is Evan. He is doing big things in tech sales, top of his class, a real go-getter. Evan, the golden boy. He was ostensibly successful, or at least, he was successful at looking successful. He drove a leased luxury car. He wore watches that cost more than my first car. He posted constantly on social media about hustle culture and grind set, using buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. He had jumped from one startup to another, his job titles getting vaguer as his salary, subsidized heavily by my father's angel investments, seemingly increased. I watched it all from a distance with a kind of anthropological detachment. I saw the cracks. I saw the way Evan's eyes darted around a room when he was asked a specific question about his business model. I saw the way my father's laugh got a little too loud when he talked about Evan's prospects, as if volume could compensate for lack of substance. But I stayed out of it. My rule was simple. Not my circus. Not my monkeys. I did not ask for their approval. And I did not offer my opinion. I had walled off that part of my heart. I told myself I was indifferent. I told myself I didn't care that my father looked at me and saw a bad investment. But the scar tissue was there. You can paint over a wall as many times as you want, but if you run your hand along it, you can still feel the dent. There was always that small, quiet voice at the back of my head asking, why wasn't I enough? Then came the phone call that dragged me back. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just finished reviewing a deposition for a case involving a Ponzi scheme disguised as a cryptocurrency exchange. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Mom? I let it ring twice before picking up. Hi. Mom? I said, keeping my voice neutral. Isla. Honey. How are you? Her voice was breathless, high-pitched. That was her news voice. I am fine. Just finished work. What is going on? It happened, she squealed. Evan proposed. He proposed to Sloane Keller. I paused. I knew the name. The Kellers were old money. Real money. Not the we have a nice house in the suburbs money like us. But we have a library wing named after us money. Wow. I said, that is big news, isn't it? My father is over the moon. It is the perfect match, a true merger of families. I could hear the smile in her voice, and beneath it, the relief. Evan had finally done the one thing that could permanently validate my father's investment. He had secured a high-value asset. We are having an engagement party, she continued, the speed of her speech increasing. Next month. At the Cedar Hollow Country Club. It is going to be huge. Your father is inviting everyone. The partners, the club board, the Kellers' entire circle. I felt the dread coil in my stomach. A Carter family production. I checked my calendar, purely out of habit. I am pretty swamped with a case. Mom, I do not know if I can get away. Isla, please. Her voice dropped, losing the excitement and hitting a note of desperate pleading. You have to come. It is important to your father. He wants the whole family there. He wants the whole family there. I walked over to the window of my apartment and looked out at the city lights. I knew what that meant. He did not want me there. He wanted the image of a family there. He wanted the tableau, the successful son, the beautiful fiancée, the supportive wife, and the daughter who rounded out the numbers. A missing daughter would raise questions. A present daughter, silent and smiling, was a prop. It would mean a lot to Evan. She lied. I knew Evan did not care if I was there or on the moon. But I also knew the cost of saying no. It would be months of guilt trips, of passive-aggressive voicemails, of being painted as the bitter, unsupportive sister. Fine, I said. Send me the date. I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of wine. I looked around my apartment, my sanctuary. I had built this life brick by brick to keep them out, but one phone call, and I was being summoned back to play my role. I was not going because I wanted to celebrate love. I was not going because I missed them. I was going because my father needed his portfolio to look balanced for the shareholders. He needed to show the world that his management was flawless, that all his assets were performing, even the one he had written off years ago. I sipped the wine, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I would go. I would wear the dress. I would smile. I would be the good daughter one last time. Little did I know. I wasn't just walking into a party. I was walking into a crime scene where I was both the victim and the evidence. They didn't invite me back because they missed me. They invited me because they needed the picture to look complete. 2 days after the initial announcement. My phone rang again. It was 10:17 at night. I was still in my home office, reviewing a stack of discovery documents for a breach of contract case, highlighting inconsistencies in yellow marker. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the body's involuntary reaction to entering a combat zone without armor. I picked up. "Hi. Mom." "Isla." "I am so glad I caught you," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were hiding in the pantry. "I wanted to talk to you about the details for the party, before your father gets involved." I leaned back in my chair, capping my highlighter. The party, the coronation of Evan. "Okay," I said. "What are the details? It is at Cedar Hollow." "Obviously," she began, the excitement bleeding back into her tone. "Your father has gone all out. He has invited the entire board of directors, his golf partners, and, of course, the Kellers. You know the Kellers are well. They are very particular. I knew. The Kellers were a local dynasty. Old money, old influence, and the kind of social gravity that made people like my father desperate to orbit them. We need everything to be perfect." Mom continued. "Sloane is a lovely girl, but her parents are quite traditional. Which brings me to, well, a small request." I closed my eyes. Here it comes. The terms and conditions. "What is it?" "Mom?" She hesitated, the silence stretching out just long enough to be insulting. "It is about your work, Isla. Your father, and I think it would be best if you did not mention the specifics of your job." I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. "Specifics? You mean the fact that I am a lawyer?" "Well, yes," she said, rushing to fill the gap. "But not just that. It is the kind of lawyer you are. Litigation, fraud. It is just so aggressive. It makes people nervous. We want the evening to be celebratory, not adversarial. Your father thinks it might intimidate some of the guests, especially the men." I let out a short, dry laugh. "You want me to hide my career because it might scare my father's golf buddies? Mom, I investigate financial crimes. Unless they are embezzling money, they have nothing to be nervous about." There was a pause on the other line, a heavy, loaded pause. "Isla, please," she said, her voice tight. "Just for one night. Can't you just be agreeable? Can't you just blend in?" "Blend in," the Carter family motto for their daughter. So, if anyone asks what I do. "What should I say?" I asked, my voice cooling to absolute zero. Should I tell them I am unemployed? Should I tell them I am a professional hobbyist? "Just tell them you work in the city," she suggested, sounding relieved that I was engaging with the premise. "Keep it vague. Or better yet, just focus on Evan. Tonight is about him. You are just Evan's sister. That is enough, isn't it? Just Evan's sister. The phrase hit me like a physical slap. After 3 years of law school, passing the bar, making associate, and winning cases that were written up in industry journals, I was being demoted back to my factory setting. To them, my identity was entirely relative. I only existed in relation to the golden boy. And actually, she added, her tone brightening with forced cheer, that might be for the best, because Mrs. Galloway is coming, and she is bringing her son, Patrick. He is about your age. He works in wealth management. A very nice boy. Very stable. I mentioned you to him, and he seemed interested. It would be a shame if you scared him off with all that talk about lawsuits and criminals. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. It was a setup, a double-tap insult. First, erase my achievements. Second, try to pawn me off on a nice boy, because clearly, a 33-year-old woman without a husband is a problem that needs solving. My father's voice echoed in my head from 15 years ago. You do not need degrees. Just find a husband. They were still playing the same script. They had not evolved. They had just moved to a more expensive venue. I almost told her to forget it. I almost told her to take her invitation and shred it. But then I looked at the document on my desk, a subpoena for a man who had hidden $3 million from his partners. I dealt with liars for a living. I dealt with people who constructed elaborate facades to hide their moral bankruptcy. Why should my family be any different? I realized then that if I did not go, if I stayed away, I was giving them the power. I was letting them think I was hurt, or ashamed, or bitter. But if I went, if I walked into that lion's den, played their game, and walked out untouched, that would be the real victory. I would go not to seek their approval, but to inspect the ruins of the relationship and certify that it was condemned. Fine, I said, my voice flat. I will be vague. I will be polite. I will be Evan's sister. Thank you. Honey. She sighed, the tension draining away. You are a good girl. Oh, and wear something pastel. Sloane loves pastels. I hung up without saying goodbye. The night of the party, I stood in front of my full-length mirror. I did not wear pastel. I wore navy blue. It was a structured, architectural dress that fit perfectly, professional, elegant, and severe. It was the color of a bruise that had healed. It was a subtle act of rebellion, dark enough to stand out in a sea of Easter colors, but formal enough that they could not claim I was underdressed. I kept my jewelry minimal. No diamond necklace, no flashy earrings, but on the lapel of the dress, right where the fabric crossed over my chest, I pinned a small silver insignia. It was not jewelry. It was a pin from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. It was a geometric scale, tiny and understated to the uneducated eye. It looked like an abstract brooch. To anyone in my world, anyone who dealt with the truth, It was a badge of rank. It was my way of bringing Isla the lawyer into the room without saying a word. It was a private joke, a secret defiance. I grabbed my clutch, checked my lipstick, and walked out the door. The drive to Cedar Hollow took 45 minutes. I drove my own car, a German sedan that I had bought with my bonus check last year. It handled the curves of the highway with precision. I did not turn on the radio. I needed the silence. I needed to calibrate my mask. Arrive. Congratulate. Leave. That was the mission. I would walk in, shake the hands, dodge the questions, ignore the nice boy in wealth management, and get out before the cake was cut. I would treat it like a deposition. Stick to the facts. Do not volunteer information, and do not let them see you sweat. As I pulled up to the gatehouse of the country club, the guard checked his clipboard. Name? He asked. Isla Carter. I said. He scanned the list. I saw his finger trace down the page. He frowned. Then he flipped to the second page, then back to the first. I am sorry. Ma'am, he said, leaning out of the booth. I do not see an Isla Carter on the guest list. I stared at him. Of course, I am the groom's sister. I said, my voice betraying nothing. He said, his face clearing. Right. There is a note here. Carter family party, +1. Go right ahead. I was not even on the list by name. I was a +1 to my own brother's engagement, a generic add-on. I drove up the winding driveway lined with manicured oaks. The clubhouse loomed ahead, a massive structure of brick and white columns, glowing with golden light. It looked like a fortress. I parked the car and took a deep breath. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I knew exactly what to expect. I thought I was walking into a social gathering where I would be ignored. I thought the worst thing that would happen was a few awkward conversations and some passive-aggressive comments about my marital status. I did not know that inside those doors, my family had prepared a narrative that went far beyond simple neglect. I did not know that they had been telling stories about me for years. Stories that were about to collide with reality in a very public way. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my navy dress, and walked toward the light. I was ready to play the extra in their movie. I did not realize that the background character was about to burn down the set. I walked up the stone steps of the Cedar Hollow clubhouse, bypassing the line of idling Bentleys and Porsches at the valet stand. I had parked my sedan in the overflow lot, a quarter-mile down the hill, specifically to avoid the silent judgment of the valet attendants who appraised net worth by the emblem on a hood. The night air was humid, clinging to my skin, but I buttoned my blazer tight. I was entering a combat zone, and I needed to keep my armor intact. At the entrance to the ballroom, a hostess with a clipboard and a headset stood guard, like a gatekeeper to paradise. She was young, blonde, and wore a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Name? She asked, her pen hovering over the list without looking up. Isla Carter, I said, keeping my voice steady. She tapped the pen against the paper. She flipped the page. She flipped it back. Her manicured finger traced the column of names, stopping at the C's. "I have a Graham and Elaine Carter," she said, her tone professional but chilly. "And obviously the groom. Evan Carter. But I do not see an Asla. Are you sure you responded to the RSVP? The line behind me was growing. I could feel the heat of impatience radiating from a couple in tuxedos and diamonds. It was a specific kind of humiliation, the bureaucratic kind. It was not a slap in the face. It was the quiet implication that you simply did not matter enough to be recorded. "I am the groom's sister," I said, loud enough for the couple behind me to hear. The hostess looked at me with a mix of confusion and skepticism, as if I had claimed to be the groom's astronaut trainer. "I will need to check with the organizer," she said, reaching for her headset. Before she could speak, the double doors swung open, and my mother fluttered out. She looked frantic, her eyes darting around until they landed on me. She was wearing a pale pink gown that washed her out, making her look like a faded rose. "It is okay," she chirped, rushing over and placing a hand on the hostess's arm. "She is with us. She is family." The way she said the word family made it sound like an apology. Her voice trembled slightly, a vibration of shame that I knew well. She was not embarrassed that my name was missing. She was embarrassed that she had to make a scene to get me in. The hostess shrugged and stepped aside. "Go right ahead." I walked past her, my mother gripping my elbow with a strength that surprised me. Why wasn't my name on the list? "Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Oh, it was just a mix-up with the planner," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "You know how these things are. So many details. Just smile. Isla, please. The Kellers are right inside." She released me as we stepped into the ballroom, and the atmosphere hit me like a physical wave. The room was vast, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen explosions of light. The air smelled of expensive perfume, lilies, and that specific metallic scent of old money. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd like ghosts, balancing trays of champagne. The noise was a low, polished hum of polite laughter and the clinking of crystal. It was a room full of people who had rehearsed their happiness. Their teeth were too white, their tans were too even, and their handshakes were transactions. I scanned the room for my father. I found him near the ice sculpture, holding court with 3 men who looked like they owned half the state. He spotted me. For a second, our eyes locked. I expected a frown. I expected a scowl. I would have even accepted anger, but he just gave me a curt nod. The kind you give to a business acquaintance you run into at the airport. It was a dismissal. "I see you. Stay over there." I drifted toward the periphery of the room, grabbing a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I found a spot near a pillar, the same vantage point from which I had watched so many of Evan's soccer games, swim meets, and award ceremonies. the designated spectator zone, 2 women in sequins were standing a few feet away, their backs to me. One of them gestured toward my father. "Graham is just beaming tonight," she said. "He must be so relieved. The Kellers are a massive catch, and the son is handsome." The other woman agreed. "Do they have other children? I feel like I never hear about anyone else." I stiffened. I took a sip of water, waiting for the answer. "I think there is a daughter," the first woman said, sounding unsure. "But she must live away. Or maybe she is the quiet type. Graham said something once about keeping their private life private. You know how it is. Sometimes one apple falls a little far from the tree. We keep our private life private." That was the line. That was the cover story. It wasn't that I was estranged. It was that I was a flaw they had photoshopped out of the family portrait. To admit I existed as I was, unmarried, independent, working in a field that required aggression, would be to admit a loss of control. So they just erased me. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, hitting the small stage at the front of the room. My father walked up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The sound echoed through the hall, silencing the chatter. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed, his voice warm and rich. The voice of a man who believed his own press release. He looked down at the front table where Evan and Sloane were sitting. Evan looked smug. One arm draped over the back of Sloane's chair. Sloane looked distracted. She was staring at her hands. "Tonight is about legacy," my father continued. He raised his glass. "When we raise our children, we hope they will stand taller than us. We hope they will carry the torch." And looking at Evan, "I know the torch is burning bright." The room murmured its agreement. "Evan," he said, gesturing to my brother, "you are the only successful child a father could ask for. You went to St. Aldridge. You conquered the business world, and now you are merging our family with the Kellers. You are the proof that investing in the right stock pays off." My breath caught in my throat. The only successful child. He didn't just say Evan was successful. He said he was the only one. I stood there in the shadows, my navy blue dress blending into the dark curtains. I looked around the room. People were smiling, nodding. They swallowed the lie because it went down smooth with the champagne. Nobody looked at me. Nobody wondered about the woman standing alone by the pillar. My father continued, listing Evan's achievements, which sounded suspiciously like a list of things my father had paid for. The degree from St. Aldridge, the internships, the ventures. He spoke about Evan's degree as if it were a war medal, a victory that belonged to the Carter name. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. This wasn't just favoritism. This was a rewriting of history. In my father's mind, I wasn't just a disappointment. I was a non-entity. I was not part of the story because I did not fit the genre he was writing. He was writing a story about dynasty and power, and I was a plot hole he had decided to ignore. I felt the eyes of the room sliding over me, not seeing me, just registering me as texture, as background noise. I felt a sudden, fierce urge to laugh. It was absurd. I was a litigator who had taken down CEOs. Yet here I was, rendered invisible by a man whose biggest accomplishment was paying for someone else's tuition. And then the energy in the room shifted. I looked toward the head table. Sloane had turned in her chair. She was not looking at my father. She was not looking at Evan. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, fixed on my face with an intensity that cut through the dim light. She squinted slightly. Then her gaze dropped to my chest, to the silver pin on my lapel. I saw the moment it clicked. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked from the pin to my face, and then back to Evan, who was preening under the spotlight. The color drained from her cheeks. It was not the look of a bride looking at her future sister-in-law. It was the look of a victim looking at a rescuer. It was the look of someone who has just realized that the safety line they were holding onto might actually be a snake. She stood up. The movement was abrupt. My father stopped speaking for a split second, surprised by the interruption, but then chuckled, assuming she was just overcome with emotion. But Sloane did not sit back down. She kept staring at me, her eyes locking onto mine across the expanse of the ballroom, in a room full of people pretending to be something they were not. She was the only one who seemed to suddenly see the truth, and for the first time all night, I did not feel invisible. I felt like the evidence that was about to be entered into the record. Sloane Keller moved through the ballroom not like a bride, but like a heat-seeking missile. She did not glide. She marched. The heavy silk of her gown rustled against the floor, a sound that seemed to cut through the ambient chatter of the party. I watched her approach, tightening my grip on my clutch. I had spent my career facing down hostile witnesses and arrogant CEOs, but seeing the woman my brother was about to marry bear down on me with that kind of intensity made my pulse spike. I braced myself for an accusation. I assumed Evan had told her some lie about me, that I was jealous, that I was unstable, that I was the black sheep who was only here on probation. I prepared my defense. Smile, deny, exit. But when Sloane stopped in front of me, there was no anger in her face. There was confusion, thick and heavy, mixed with a dawning, terrifying realization. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral, like gardenias and old money. She looked at the silver pin on my lapel again, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to read fine print without her glasses. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low, dropping under the volume of the jazz band. "I know this is going to sound strange, and please tell me if I am wrong, but is that a pin from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners?" I blinked. In all my years of wearing it, no one outside of my specific legal circle had ever recognized it. It was a geometric scale, abstract enough to pass for modern art. I hesitated, my internal radar pinging a warning. "Yes," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It is." She took a small breath, her hands clenching at her sides. "And you work in the city? At a firm?" "I do." I said, "Northgate and Vale?" She asked. The question came out like a plea. I stiffened. My firm was not a household name. We were the people you called when you wanted to keep things out of the households. We were the fixers, the investigators, the ones who went through the trash. Yes, I said, slowly. I am a senior associate there. Sloane's hand flew to her mouth. The color left her face so fast I thought she might faint. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to reconcile two completely different images. I knew it, she whispered. I knew I recognized you, not your face. We never met in person. But the name, Isla Carter, I saw it on the billing statements. I saw it on the discovery motions. She reached out and touched my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. 3 years ago, she said, her voice trembling, my father's logistics company, the Keller Group. We were being bled dry by that supplier in Ohio. They had cooked the books so well that 3 audit firms missed it. We were looking at bankruptcy. We were looking at losing everything my grandfather built. I remembered the case. Keller Logistics versus Tri-State Distribution. It was a nightmare of forensic accounting. Thousands of invoices falsified by a fraction of a cent, accumulating over a decade into millions of dollars. It had taken me 4 months of sleepless nights to find the pattern. I had built the case that not only saved the company, but put 2 of the supplier's executives in federal prison. I worked on that case. I said softly. I led the investigation. Sloane looked at me as if I were a ghost who had just walked out of a wall. You saved us, she said. Her eyes were wet. My father, he never forgot the name of the attorney who found the smoking gun. He talks about that shark Carter like you were a mythical creature. He said you were the sharpest mind he had ever encountered. She shook her head, a laugh bubbling up that sounded close to a sob. I have wanted to thank you for 3 years. I wanted to write a letter, but the firm said it was against policy to contact litigators directly during the settlement. And here you are, standing at my engagement party. She looked around the room, at the opulent decorations, at the people eating canapes, and then back at me. But why she started, her brow furrowing. Why didn't Evan say anything? When I told him about the case, about how close we came to ruin, he just nodded. He knew my family owed everything to a lawyer named Carter. Why didn't he tell me it was his sister? I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her that in Evan's version of reality, I was not a savior. I was a footnote. But before I could speak, a shadow fell over us. Isla. Evan appeared at Sloane's elbow. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, his smile tight and brittle. He looked between us, his eyes darting with the frantic energy of a man trying to plug a leak in a dam with chewing gum. I see you 2 have met, he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. Sloane, honey, you should not let Isla bore you. She can talk your ear off about nothing much. He tried to hand Sloane a glass, attempting to physically pivot her away from me. Sloane did not take the glass. She did not move. She kept her eyes fixed on him, We were just talking about work. Evan, she said. Her voice was cool, stripped of the warmth it had held 30 seconds ago. Evan laughed, a nervous, barking sound. Work? Oh, God, don't get her started. Isla is in administration. The word hung in the air between us. Administration. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to play along, just paper pushing. Right. Isla? Filing, data entry, boring stuff. She helps the real lawyers keep their calendars straight. Very important work. But, dry. I stood there, looking at my brother. I looked at his expensive tuxedo, purchased with money he likely borrowed. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. He was terrified. He was terrified that the woman he was marrying would find out that the sister he had painted as a loser was actually the reason her family still had a fortune. I could have destroyed him right then. I could have pulled out my business card. I could have recited the case number of the Keller litigation. I could have told him exactly how much his fiancé's father had paid my firm in hourly fees. But I didn't. I realized that the truth is heavier when you let someone else pick it up. So I said nothing. I just sipped my water and looked at him with a flat, impassive gaze. Sloane turned to Evan. She turned slowly, her whole body pivoting. Administration? She repeated. Yeah, Evan said, shrugging, thinking he was in the clear. Legal secretary type stuff? Why? Sloane looked at him. It was a look I knew well. It was the look I gave a witness when they just contradicted their own sworn affidavit. It was the look of someone finding a crack in the foundation. She is a senior associate at Northgate and Vale. Evan, Sloane said. Her voice was ice. She is the lead investigator who saved my father's company. She is the reason we are standing in this country club and not in a foreclosure hearing. Evan's smile froze. It didn't drop. It just calcified. He blinked rapidly. What? No. You are confused. Isla works at a firm. Sure. But she is support staff. She just... Ms. Carter? The voice came from behind me. It was deep, gravelly, and commanded instant authority. We all turned. Standing there was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a tuxedo that cost more than my entire education. It was Marcus Sterling. He was not just a guest. He was a legend in the legal community, a former federal prosecutor who now ran one of the biggest investment banks in the state. I straightened my spine instinctively. Mr. Sterling, I said, nodding respectfully. I did not know you were a friend of the family, Sterling said, stepping forward and extending his hand. He ignored Evan completely. I just read your analysis on the TechCore merger fraud. The way you deconstructed those shell companies. Brilliance. Absolute brilliance if my general counsel is still talking about it. He shook my hand firmly, treating me with the deference of a peer, of an equal. I hope you are not poaching her. Marcus, I said, allowing a small, professional smile. Northgate would not be happy. He laughed. A booming sound. I might try. We need minds like yours. Good to see you, Isla. He nodded to Sloane and Evan, a vague, polite nod to the civilians, and walked away. The silence that followed was deafening. Evan looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Mr. Sterling's retreating back, then at me, then at Sloane. He was drowning, and there was no life raft. Sloane was staring at Evan, but the look on her face had changed. The confusion was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was something cold and sharp. It was the look of a woman who had just realized she had bought a counterfeit bag, and now she was wondering what else in her life was fake. You told me she was a secretary, Sloane said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel banging down. You told me she was not ambitious. You told me she needed help. Evan stammered. I just meant, I did not know the details. We do not talk about work. You do not talk about work? Sloane repeated. Or you did not want me to know that your sister is the most successful person in this family? She took a step back. Just one step, but it felt like she had crossed a canyon. She looked at Evan not with love, but with investigation. She was looking at him the way I looked at a balance sheet that did not add up. We need to talk. Evan, she said, now. She turned and walked away toward the terrace doors, not waiting for him. Evan looked at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic and fury. What did you do? He hissed. I took a sip of my water, cool and refreshing. I didn't say a word. Evan, I replied. I just stood here. You are the one who spoke. I watched him chase after her, his composure shattering with every step. I stood alone by the pillar, feeling the weight of the silver pin on my chest. It felt lighter than it ever had before. The script had been flipped. The invisible girl had just become the only real thing in the room. The time on my phone screen read 9:17 in the evening. The ballroom was still buzzing with the artificial energy of forced celebration, but the noise felt distant, like I was hearing it underwater. I was standing in the shadow of a large velvet curtain, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had just watched my brother's carefully constructed facade crack, but I did not feel triumphant. I felt a strange, vibrating tension, the kind that precedes an earthquake. My phone buzzed against my palm. It was a text from Mason Reed. Mason was a junior partner at my firm, a man who treated background checks like a recreational sport. We were currently working a case involving a Ponzi scheme, so his brain was already in hunter mode. I had not asked him to look into Evan. I had not asked him to do anything, but Mason had an instinct for fraud, and apparently Something about my family's public flaunting of wealth had triggered his radar. Isla, serious question. Does your brother actually have a degree from St. Aldridge? Or a Series 7 license? Because I am looking at the alumni database and the regulatory registry, and he is not in either of them. I see a guy with his name pitching a wealth mindset course on a forum for dropshipping. Is this the same Evan? The air in my lungs turned to ice. I unlocked my phone and switched apps. My fingers flew across the screen, accessing the public records database I use daily for work. It was muscle memory. I typed in Evan Carter. I filtered by state. I filtered by education. No results found. I searched for his employment history. My father had bragged that Evan was a vice president of sales at a boutique investment firm. I pulled up the firm's filings. Evan Carter was listed, but not as a vice president. He was listed as an independent contractor, lead generation. It was a commission-only sales role, basically a glorified telemarketer. The lie was so big, so audacious, that I almost admired the architecture of it. My father had spent the last decade selling shares in a company that did not exist. Evan was not a success story. He was a hollow shell, painted gold. But I was not done. My thumb hovered over the search bar. A cold, sinking feeling in my gut told me to keep digging. If they lied about the income, they lied about the money. And if they lied about the money, they had to get the liquidity from somewhere. I typed in my own name, Isla Carter. I pulled up my credit report. I monitored it usually, but I had not checked the detailed breakdown of closed accounts in years. I scrolled past my mortgage, my credit cards, all paid in full. Then I stopped. There was an entry near the bottom of the history, dated August 28, 2010. Education. Loan, servicer, Fed loan. Original balance, $20,000. I frowned. That was the year I started college. But I did not take out a loan that year. I paid with my scholarship and my waitressing tips. I scrolled down. Disbursement. January 15, 2011. Amount, $20,000. Disbursement, September 2, 2012. Amount, $20,000. The list went on. Total principal, $80,000. Status, consolidated, deferred. Listing agent, Graham Carter, cosigner/guarantor. The room spun. I had to reach out and grab the heavy velvet fabric of the curtain to keep from falling. $80,000. I never signed for this. I never saw a penny of this money. I lived on instant noodles. I glued my shoes together. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in a library because I was too terrified to spend money on heat. And all that time, there was $80,000 taken out in my name? The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They did not just neglect me. They did not just ignore me. They harvested me. They used my clean credit, my blank slate of a financial history, to fund the very lifestyle I was excluded from. That tuition money my father paid for Evan. It wasn't his money. It was mine. Or rather, it was debt assigned to me. I felt bile rise in my throat. I looked across the room. My father was laughing with a group of men. A glass of scotch in his hand. He looked so comfortable, so secure. He was standing on a platform built from my stolen future. A hand gripped my arm. I jumped, nearly dropping the phone. It was Sloane. She looked like she had just walked through a war zone. Her hair was slightly out of place, and her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a steeliness in her gaze that I had not seen before. She was not the blushing bride anymore. She was the daughter of a logistics mogul, and she was looking for the bottom line. "Isla," she said, her voice shaking but demanding. "He is lying to me. I know he is lying. He keeps talking in circles. He keeps saying I just don't understand the industry." She gripped my arm tighter, her nails digging into the fabric of my dress. "What is he hiding? You are the investigator. Tell me, what is he hiding?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who was about to legally bind herself to a man who was a ghost. I could have told her everything right then. I could have shown her the phone, but I knew that for the truth to stick, she had to find it herself. She had to be the one to turn over the rock. Ask him about his degree. I said, my voice sounding hollow and metallic to my own ears. Ask him to show you the diploma, not a picture of it, the actual piece of paper. Sloane stared at me, her breath hitching. And ask him about the money, I added, the anger finally bleeding into my voice. Ask him how he paid for it, and ask him whose name is on the receipts. Before Sloane could respond, a high-pitched feedback whine screeched through the speakers. The room went silent. The MC, a tuxedoed man with a smile that looked like it was glued on, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "if we could have your attention, we have a special surprise. The bride-to-be, the lovely Sloane Keller, would like to say a few words." My father started clapping enthusiastically, gesturing for Sloane to go up. He looked delightful. He thought this was the part where she thanked the Carter family for welcoming her, where she solidified the merger. Sloane looked at me one last time. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and walked toward the stage. She stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight hit her, turning her pale skin translucent. She looked out at the crowd. She looked at Evan, who was smiling nervously at the front table. She looked at my father, who was beaming with pride. Then she looked at the back of the room, directly at the shadows where I was standing. I had prepared a speech for tonight. Sloane began, her voice clear and cutting through the silence. I was going to talk about love. I was going to talk about joining a new family. She paused. The silence in the room grew heavy. My father's smile faltered slightly. But tonight, I realized that I have been looking at this family through the wrong lens. I have been so focused on the image presented to me that I missed the reality standing in the back of the room. She took a breath. I want to take this moment to thank the person who is actually responsible for my family being here today. Not because of a marriage alliance, but because she saved us when we were drowning. The room murmured. Evan started to stand up, looking confused. I want to thank my future sister-in-law, Isla Carter, Sloane said, her voice ringing out like a bell. My father froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Isla is not a secretary, Sloane continued, her eyes locking onto my father's face. She is a senior associate at Northgate and Vale Legal. She is the forensic investigator who uncovered the fraud that almost destroyed my father's company 3 years ago. She is the most brilliant, capable, and honest person I have ever encountered, and I am honored to finally know her real name. The room erupted, not in applause, but in a shockwave of whispers. People turned to look for me. The guests, the elite of Virginia, were murmuring. Northgate and Vale? The fraud case? My father's face went from confusion to a shade of gray I had never seen before. It was the color of wet ash. He looked at Evan, who had sunk into his chair, covering his face with his hand. The narrative was gone. The golden boy was shrinking, and the invisible daughter was suddenly 10 feet tall. Sloane did not say anything else. She did not toast Evan. She simply placed the microphone back on the stand and walked off the stage, leaving the feedback loop humming in the stunned silence. I stood there, feeling the eyes of the room land on me. But this time, they were not looking through me. They were seeing me. I turned to leave. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out. Isla. The voice was a low growl, right beside my ear. My father had moved faster than I thought possible. He had crossed the room while everyone was watching Sloane. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with a bruising force. He pulled me deeper into the shadows of the curtain, away from the prying eyes of the guests. His face was contorted. The charming patriarch mask was gone, replaced by something ugly and vicious. You think you are clever? He hissed, his breath hot and smelling of scotch. You think you can embarrass me in front of my investors, in front of the Kellers? I looked at him. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of him. I saw him for what he was. A small man standing on a pile of debt. I didn't say a word. Dad, I said coldly. Sloane did. He tightened his grip. You are going to fix this, he whispered. You are going to go out there and tell them you work in administration. You are going to tell them you exaggerated. No, I said. And by the way, I saw the credit report. I saw the $80,000. I expected him to flinch. I expected him to deny it. Instead, he smiled. It was a terrifying, mirthless smile. Oh, that? He said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made my skin crawl. You think that is your big leverage? You think you are a victim? He leaned in closer. until his lips were almost touching my ear. You think you were just ignored. Isla, you think we just forgot about you? You arrogant little girl. You have no idea. You don't know what you agreed to when you were 18. You signed the power of attorney the week before you left for college. You gave me everything. He pulled back, his eyes gleaming with triumph. I own you. Isla, I own your name. I own your credit. And if you try to burn this family down, I will make sure you are the one who turns to ash. My father's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. He thought he had played the ultimate trump card. He thought that by invoking a power of attorney I supposedly signed at 18, he could silence me. He thought he owned me. But Graham Carter had forgotten one crucial detail. He was a salesman. I was a fraud litigator. I did not flinch. I did not step back. Instead, I stepped into his personal space, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. I grabbed his arm, and with a strength he clearly did not expect from his daughter, I pulled him toward a semi-private alcove near the terrace doors. I motioned for my mother, who was hovering nearby like a nervous moth, to follow. We were in a corner, shielded by a large floral arrangement, but we were still close enough to the main floor that raised voices would carry. That was exactly where I wanted us. The truth is a disinfectant, and it works best in the light. You are bluffing. Dad, I said, my voice low but cutting. And you are bad at it. I pulled out my phone again. I tapped the screen and held it up to his face, forcing him to look at the digital paper trail he thought he had buried. This is the loan consolidation document, I said, keeping my tone clinical, the same tone I used when cross-examining a hostile witness. It was executed on January 15th, 2011. It was signed electronically. I swiped to the next image, and this is the IP address stamp for that signature. It traces back to the router in your home office in Maple Glen. I was living in a dorm room 3 hours away that day. I was in a biology lab from 2 to 5 in the afternoon. I have the transcripts to prove it. My father's face twitched. And regarding that power of attorney you mentioned, I continued, relentless. Even if I did sign a general durable power of attorney, which I will be contesting, it does not grant you the right to engage in self-dealing. Using my credit to take out a loan for your son's tuition is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is fraud. Graham, it is a Class B felony. My mother made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She slumped against the wall, her hand covering her mouth. Elaine, look at me, I said, turning to her. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. Did you know? I asked. Did you know he was using my social security number to pay for Evan? I knew there were papers. She stammered, wringing her hands. The mail always came to the house. Your father said he was handling your finances. He said he was helping you build credit. I didn't dare ask. You know how he gets. You didn't dare ask. I repeated, my voice devoid of pity. You sacrificed me to keep the peace. You let him sell my future so you wouldn't have to have an uncomfortable conversation. My father straightened his tuxedo jacket, trying to regain his composure. He looked around to see if anyone was watching. You are being selfish. Isla, he spat, his voice rising. It was for the family. We needed the liquidity. Evan needed the degree to get his foot in the door. You were always the smart one. You were resilient. You didn't need the help. You could handle the struggle. Evan needed the path cleared. It was a strategic decision. A strategic decision. He did not deny it. He justified it. To him. Cannibalizing his daughter to feed his son was just good business sense. Before I could respond, the terrace door banged open. Evan stormed in, his face flushed with wine and panic. What is going on? He demanded, looking between us. Why are you ruining this night? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Sloane is out there asking questions I can't answer. You need to go out there and fix this. Isla? I looked at my brother. The golden boy. The investment. He was 35 years old, and he was still waiting for Daddy to fix the world for him. I am not fixing anything. Evan. I said, I am balancing the ledger. Fix what? The voice came from behind Evan. Sloane was standing there. She had followed him. She was holding her dress up so it wouldn't drag, and her face was pale as marble. She had heard the last part. What does she need to fix? Evan? Sloane asked, stepping into the alcove. Evan spun around, putting on his best salesman smile, but it looked grotesque on his sweating face. Sloane, baby, it is nothing, just a family misunderstanding. Isla is having a bit of a breakdown. She is jealous of our moment. Isla says you took out a loan in her name, Sloane said, ignoring him and looking at my father. Is that true? My father puffed out his chest. It was a family financial arrangement. It is none of your concern. Sloane, it is $80,000. Dad, I interrupted, ensuring my voice carried to the couple standing near the shrimp cocktail tower. $80,000 of debt that you assigned to me so Evan could go to a school he barely graduated from. Evan turned on me. Shut up, he hissed. You are just trying to sabotage me because you are bitter. You are a lonely, miserable workaholic, and you can't stand that I am happy. Sloane looked at Evan. She looked at him for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. It was the look of a woman waking up from a long coma. You are not happy. Evan, she said softly, you are a fraud. She looked at me. He told me he paid off his student loans last year. She said to me. He showed me a spreadsheet. He didn't pay them. I said, because they were never in his name. They were in mine. Sloane closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and when she opened them, the bride was gone. The businesswoman was back. She reached for her left hand. Sloane. "Wait," Evan said, reaching for her. "Don't do this. Think about the optics. Think about your parents." "I am thinking about them," she said. "I am thinking about how my father hates liars, and I am thinking about how I almost married a man who is living on a fake file." She slid the diamond ring off her finger. It was a large, gaudy rock, likely purchased on credit that Evan didn't have. She took Evan's hand, placed the ring in his palm, and closed his fingers over it. "I don't marry projects." "Evan," she said, her voice steady and lethal. "And I certainly don't marry accomplices to fraud." She turned to my father. "Mr. Carter," she said. "My father will be contacting you regarding the investment he made in Evan's venture fund. I imagine he will want a full audit." She looked at me one last time. There was no pity in her eyes, only respect. "Thank you." "Isla," she said, "for saving me. Twice." Sloane turned and walked away, her head high, leaving the three Carters standing in the ruins of their own making. My father turned on me, his face purple with rage. "Are you happy now?" he snarled. "You destroyed this family. You humiliated us. Do you know what you have done? You have made us a laughingstock." "I did not humiliate you," I said, my voice calm, the courtroom energy humming in my veins. "You humiliated yourself the day you decided I was disposable." He took a step toward me, his hand raised as if to point a finger in my face. "You listen to me," he threatened. "You keep your mouth shut about the money. If you try to take this legal, I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell everyone you are unstable. I will ruin your career." I laughed. It was a genuine, dark laugh. "You still don't get it, do you?" I asked. "I am not the 18-year-old girl who was afraid to ask for tuition. I am the woman who puts men like you in prison." I pulled a business card from my clutch. Not my card, but the card of a colleague. "I have an appointment on Monday morning with a forensic accountant and a credit fraud attorney," I said, holding the card up, my father frozen. "Here is your choice." "Graham," I said, using his first name for the first time. It felt like breaking a chain. "You have 24 hours to formally assume the debt. You will sign an affidavit, admitting the loan was taken out without my consent, and you will transfer the liability to your name, or pay it off in full. And if I don't," he sneered, "then I file the police report." I said simply, "I have the IP logs. I have the forged signatures. I have the bank records. I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. And I will make sure every single one of your golf buddies knows exactly how you treat your own blood." The color drained from his face completely. He looked at my mother. She was weeping silently, but she did not move to comfort him. She knew I was not bluffing. "Isla, please." Evan whimpered, holding the ring. "Mom, tell her to stop." I looked at them. The father who used me, the mother who ignored me, the brother who stole from me. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were not giants. They were just grifters who had run out of road. "I do not need your permission to leave, and I do not need your approval to exist," I said. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the alcove, past the staring guests, past the whisper network that was already dissecting the fall of the House of Carter. I did not look down. I did not hurry. I walked to the heavy oak doors of the club. The air outside was cool and clean. It smelled of rain and freedom. I did not feel sad. I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for 15 years. I took my phone out and sent one final text to the family group chat, a message that would pop up on all 3 of their screens simultaneously. "When you are ready to tell the truth without shrinking me, I will listen. Until then, don't use my name." I got into my car, the one I paid for, and drove away. I didn't look back at the rearview mirror. There was nothing there worth seeing. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please, comment down below where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Morgan Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.